The chair lays out on second reading HJR 155. The clerk read the resolution.
HJR 155 by Guerin, proposing a constitutional amendment to foster economic development and job growth, provide tax relief and funding for education and public safety programs, support the horse racing industry, and reform horse racing and greyhound racing by authorizing casino gaming and destination resorts, creating the Texas Gaming Commission, authorizing sports wagering, requiring a license to conduct casino gaming, requiring the imposition of casino gaming and sports wagering taxes, requiring license.
The chair recognizes Mr. Guerin to explain the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, it's time to let your constituents decide if gambling should be legal in Texas. We should let the people vote.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Canales, for what purpose?
Parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Do you know where we can find the overs and unders on Kempel's bill and Mr. Guerin's bill and Mr. Leach's bill passing?
The chair is not advised.
Members, HJR finally lets the Texans vote on the question of whether or not to allow limited casino-style gaming in Texas. We're not just talking about just any kind of casino. We're not talking about slot machines and 7-Elevens, or a slot on every corner, slot machine. We're not even talking about slot machines in my restaurant. Today, for those Texans who choose to exercise their freedom to gamble legally, they're doing it in every state that surrounds us. And if you have ever driven through Oklahoma by WinStar, every license plate on that parking lot is, or not everyone, but most of them are. Each year, millions of our Texans go to Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Louisiana, and Arkansas, and they spend billions of their entertainment dollars in those states. Just last month, Louisiana gaming officials were quoted in Houston media saying Texans make up an estimated 85% of the business at Lake Charles. According to well-respected economists, this HJR will add over 100,000 construction jobs and an estimated of 70,000 permanent jobs. It will generate billions of dollars in new development investment and will assist the state and local communities with a new stream of continuing revenue. The joint resolution will not only keep Texas tourism dollars at home, it will also bring massive out-of-state business and leisure tourism to our state because of extremely large investment minimums that are designed to ensure developments which are built, and they will be world-class casinos. These are casinos not only with casinos, but restaurants, shopping, large entertainment venues. The tax alone on the gambling tax would be 15% of the gross revenue. Not taking out expenses, it's 15% of the gross gambling revenue, plus any sales and liquor taxes that are sales, liquor tax, and hotel taxes that are generated by these. The HJR is a compromise which brings together gaming stakeholders who've had long concerns about our gaming options in Texas. It seeks to maintain a limited footprint, 8 casinos, possibly 9, by focusing first on existing pari-mutuel wagering licenses that have already been authorized and exist in areas of the state where the greatest economic impact will be realized. This approach not only keeps the lid on the number of licenses, it also serves to allow for more immediate development of destination resorts to quickly realize the job-related creation and economic development. It also seeks to revitalize the horse racing industry. It will help make Texas the #1 horse breeding state in the nation while benefiting Texas agricultural businesses with greater economic activity because of a vibrant racing industry. The resolution also envisions a fully open bid opportunity in the state outside of the other areas that has an additional $1 billion minimum investment requirement, and this could only be located in a county which votes in favor of the constitutional amendment. The language here creates a basic structure for the gaming industry related to licensing, requiring the imposition of casino gaming and sports wagering taxes and license application fees, and authorizing tribal state compact related to gaming. Members, this really is about letting your voters decide. Under the way the bill is written today, There will be 8 casinos, one of which will be an open bid. The others are tied to the current pari-mutuel licensing. We have watched other states benefit from Texas gambling for too long. I have an amendment, Mr. Speaker.
Ms. Martinez Fisher, for what purpose?
I rise to raise a point of order pursuant to Article 3, Section 56 of the Texas Constitution.
Please bring your point of order down front. It's priceless. How mom's there right now? Huh? I haven't been yet. Verde? Stadium looks awesome. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment. Members, the point of order has been withdrawn. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Guerin.
The chair recognizes Mr. Guerin to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, 20% of the gaming tax, the 15% gross gaming tax, is dedicated to the horse racer, to the horse tracks for additional purses. Part of the money is dedicated to law enforcement, and the rest of that 20% is going to operate the Gaming Commission. The amendment that I'm adding will constitutionally dedicate the remaining 80% to increase salaries for public school teachers in this state and a cost of living adjustment for the TRS, the retired teachers. The legislature shall by law allocate a portion of the revenue received from the tax imposed on the gaming casino revenue to casino license holder public safety programs. It's acceptable to the author. Move adoption.
Mr. Guerin sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. The objection to the adoption amendment. The chair hears none. The amendment is adopted. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by A. Johnson of Harris.
The chair recognizes Ms. Johnson Harris to explain the amendment.
What this amendment does is says that some of the revenue that will come in will be allocated to the local counties for public safety. I know that this is a debate that we will have, and our voters will decide whether or not they want to approve gaming in Texas. But we do know that while there are going to be things that the industry will do to try to combat issues of crime, gaming does have an addictive element, and when you see those other collateral addictive issues such as alcohol or drug abuse, domestic violence, human trafficking, even though the industry is going to do what they can against it, we will see something that we have to address within criminal justice and public safety. We will also see in our counties that people will leave and go to these resorts, but then they'll come back home and we will have to deal with them. So what this amendment does is recognize that every county will get a piece of the pie of the revenue that is brought in, and it will be divvied up by the size of your county and the need that you have for courts, for police officers, for public defenders, for prosecutors, for every issue that address public safety that will have to be addressed on a local level. And so I would ask that you vote yes on this amendment.
The chair recognizes Mr. Guerin in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I oppose this amendment because part of the amendment that you just put on, part of that money is dedicated already to public safety. In the enabling legislation, which Mr. Kemple will have following this, 10% of the gross is dedicated to public safety already. This would take the money away from teacher salaries and away from the teacher's retirement system.
Mr. Kemple, for what purpose?
To ask the author a question,
The
please.
gentleman yield for a question.
Yes, I will.
Mr. Guerin, is it your understanding that we have about 10% of gross gaming revenue into public safety already?
I do
Thank you, Mr.
understand that it is dedicated, 10% of the gross tax is dedicated to public safety already.
The chair recognizes Ms. Johnson Harris to close on the amendment.
So the only thing that I would differ on is this amendment says that the monies go back to your counties for local control, and it is done by population growth. So every county gets their proper apportionment of their piece of pie. Move past, or move it up.
Ms. Johnson Harris sends up an amendment. The amendment is not acceptable to the author. The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment. This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. So Mr. Guerin voting no. Ms. Johnson of Harris voting aye. Ms. Davis voting no. Mr. Harless voting no. Mr. Dutton voting no. Mr. Smith voting no. Ms. Leo Wilson voting no. Ms. Leo Wilson voting no. Have all members voted? There being 50 ayes and 92 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Morales and Maverick.
The chair recognizes Mr. Morales of Maverick to explain the amendment.
Mr. Morales of Maverick, your amendment.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Tinderholt, for what purpose?
there is a point of order against further consideration of this amendment according to House Rule 11, Section 2.
Please bring your point of order down front. Mr. Tinderholt raises a point of order against further consideration of the Morales of Maverick Amendment, Amendment Number 3 under Rule 11, Section 2, on the grounds that the amendment is not germane. The joint resolution would legalize casino gambling and sports betting in Texas. It proposes a comprehensive scheme for the regulation of these forms of gambling, including the establishment of the Texas Gaming Commission to oversee license holders. It also authorizes the governor to conduct good faith negotiations with any of Texas's 3 federally recognized Indian tribes for tribal state compacts, which are required under federal law to permit a tribe to conduct the Class 3 forms of gambling legalized by the proposed constitutional amendment. Mr. Morales and Maverick's amendment would expressly allow the Kickapoo tribe to operate a Class 3 casino on owned or leased land within 300 miles of its reservation boundaries and allow the tribe and the Secretary of State to regulate that casino. The amendment seeks to compel an action the joint resolution requires to be negotiated. Further, the amendment seeks to create a new regulatory scheme that bears no resemblance to the proposed regulatory scheme. While it is permissible to place limits on discretionary authority, an amendment may not completely negate the discretion to be granted. Additionally, any regulatory method proposed by an amendment must be closely aligned with that of the main measure, which is not the case here. The major purpose of the amendment is to constitutionally impose a Class 3 compact between Texas and the Kickapoos for purpose of federal law. The amendment is not germane. Accordingly, the point of order is well taken and sustained. The following amendment, the clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Gomez.
The chair recognizes Ms. Gomez to explain the amendment.
Mr. Speaker and member, thank you. This amendment simply adds and clarifies that the Brownsville-Harlingen Metropolitan Statistical Area is a location for possible consideration, and I want to thank the author because I believe it is acceptable.
Ms. Gomez sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. The objection to the adoption amendment. The chair hears none. The amendment is adopted. The following amendment, the clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Busey.
The chair recognizes Mr. Busey to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment would add Central Texas. I believe it's acceptable.
Mr. Busey sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. The objection to the adoption amendment. The chair hears none. The amendment is adopted. The following amendment, the clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Manuel.
The chair recognizes Mr. Manuel to explain the amendment.
Thank you. This is an amendment that would allow racetrack licensing in Jefferson County.
Mr. Manuel sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. The objection to the adoption amendment. Chair hears none. The amendment is adopted. The following amendment, the clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Schaefer.
Is Mr. Schaefer on the floor of the House? The chair recognizes Mr. Schaefer to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This amendment simply ensures that gambling interests from China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea will not be part of the gambling interests that come to the state of Texas. The Chinese Communist Party is heavily involved in gambling in certain parts of the world, and we're just going to ensure that those businesses that are doing business that are closely tied to the Chinese Communist Party are not part of what comes to Texas.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Sheen, for what purpose?
Does gentleman yield for questions?
Gentleman yield for questions.
I will yield for some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. So, explain again. So, what does the Communist Chinese government have to do with this amendment?
Okay, so what we're doing here in this amendment is saying that if you're operating gambling operations in China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea, and the territories that they control, then those gambling operations are basically integrated with those countries who have, they are diametrically opposed to the interest of our national security.
Are you calling out these countries' governments, so specifically the Communist Chinese government, are you calling them out because they're a threat to the United States, because they're a significant human rights violation? What is it about these countries' governments?
Both of those. I think we have national security interests both in cybersecurity, both in the financial ties that come in when you have these large gambling interests. You have human trafficking issues. The human trafficking issues, particularly in places like Macau, are a big deal, and Hong Kong. And these are gambling interests that we simply don't want that to be a part of what comes to the state of Texas.
So one of the companies that's invested heavily in trying to legalize gambling is the Sands Corporation. What kind of presence do they have in communist China?
Well, Sands is the largest employer in Macau, which is completely Chinese controlled. And so Sands, if we pass this and this becomes law, Sands is essentially integrated with the Chinese government in Macau. And they would be able to come here and compete for these licenses.
So do they actually have an arrangement, like a 10-year binding contract with one of the Chinese government provinces?
That's accurate.
So let me ask you this. If there was a scenario where casinos were legalized and Sands Corporation has a significant presence in communist China, are you concerned at all about U.S. data residing in communist China?
Absolutely, and I think it would be an irreconcilable conflict of interest for the Sands Corporation to be able to separate its interests in the state of Texas from the interests and the obligations that they have to the Chinese Communist Party.
So this could actually be a threat to Texans and other states, can it not, with respect to citizens' information being hacked,
Absolutely.
being exposed,
Compromising,
all those types of things?
Theft of intellectual property, when you talk about being able to compromise executives and people who own intellectual property, getting them into gambling debt, being able to have data on who's in gambling debt, being able to influence people, extort people.
Let me just ask you one more question. Are you aware that literally communist China attacks the United States daily with thousands and thousands of cyber attacks?
Absolutely. It's a big problem.
They're a significant human rights violator. This is a great amendment, Mr. Schaefer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker,
Ms. Gonzalez, for purpose.
I raise a point of order against further consideration of this amendment under Rule 11, Section 2, on the grounds that the amendment is not germane.
Please bring your point of order down front. The point of order has been withdrawn. The following amendment to the amendment, the clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Guerin.
The chair recognizes Mr. Guerin to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. My amendment to the amendment simply says that the amendment will apply to Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and only mainland China, not to Macau, not to Taiwan. And Macau and Hong Kong are special administrative regions with democratically elected governments, free market open economies, as well as separate and independent legal and judicial systems. There are no American gaming companies that do business in mainland China. And all of this is why specific special administrative regions are excluded from sanctions by the United States Office of Foreign Asset Control. The Department of Treasury's agency, which administers and enforces economic and trade sanctions. Macau and Taiwan we are not sanctioning them. And that's why I'm trying to take Mr. Schaefer's amendment and only to include mainland China. And if we're going to start prohibiting the state from doing business with American corporations who have business licenses or licenses with America's largest trading partner, then we need to include ExxonMobil, Halliburton, Dell, JCPenney, Texas Instruments, ConocoPhillips, Kimberly-Clark. So I'm saying we let Macau and Taiwan not be included in his amendment, and I'll be happy to accept his amendment at that point, but if without it, then I'm going to have to fight it. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Schaefer to speak in opposition to the amendment
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Ranchia, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for questions?
Not at this time.
Not at this moment,
Thank
sir.
Respect the argument Representative Guerin is making, but it goes exactly opposite of what we're trying to do. Chinese Communist Party has a significant business interest in Macau and Hong Kong with these gambling interests. Representative Guerin's amendment to the amendment puts them back into the bill. Now, my point is that the Chinese Communist Party has been involved in human rights abuses. We love the Chinese people, but the gambling and the financial interests with the Sands Corporation in Macau does not need to be a part of what takes place in the state of Texas. And for that reason, I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Ranchia, for what purpose?
will the gentleman yield for questions,
The
please?
gentleman yield for questions.
I'll yield.
The gentleman yields.
What do you have against the Republic of China?
I think they have numerous human rights abuses. The Communist Party, Chinese Party, has been stealing intellectual property from Americans for many years.
No. I think you misheard my question. You're talking about the People's Republic of China. The Republic of China is Taiwan.
Taiwan is not part of my amendment. Taiwan has been excluded
it is part
from
of
mine.
Charlie's amendment. So Taiwan, and Representative Chen Button knows this, is the Republic of China. And my question was not about the People's Republic of China, which is the mainland. The Republic of China is actually Taiwan, and that's how they refer to themselves. So what do you have against Taiwan?
I love them, and they're not excluded in my amendment.
To Charlie's amendment.
I love them, and they're not excluded from my amendment. My amendment explicitly says that Taiwan can do business here. Taiwan's not a part of my amendment or what Charlie's doing at all.
You're speaking against the Speaker Guerin's amendment to the amendment, which would permit Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau from remaining in the bill. And so why are you speaking against the Republic of China staying in the bill?
Macau.
No, the Republic of China is my question.
Look, if you want the Sands Corporation in Macau and Hong Kong to be a part of this, then support Mr. Guerin's amendment. If you don't, then support mine. It's that simple.
Okay, but just to be clear, his covers the Republic of China, which is Taiwan. The capital of Taiwan is?
Taipei.
Excellent, excellent. Very good, very good. Very good. And then
Geography.
And then Macau, which has the franchise, they get to vote, and also Hong Kong, right? So those three would remain in the bill under Speaker Guerin's amendment. Is that not right?
No. So those three would, but my amendment as
Okay.
it stands keeps.
Thank you.
My amendment as it stands keeps Taiwan in. Okay? Don't have an issue with Taiwan. But Macau and Hong Kong would be excluded. And that's the purpose of my amendment. And I would ask you to oppose the amendment to the amendment.
Mr. Guerin, the chair recognizes Mr. Guerin to close on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. As I said, the government of Macau is an elected government, has its own judicial system, and if we're going to start calling out Sands, we're going to be calling out one of the biggest supporters of the United States' greatest ally in Jerusalem, the Israeli government. Sands Corporation and the Adelson family is a huge supporter. So if we're going to call out the Sands, let's call them out and let's give them the credit that they deserve. Members, stick with me on this, on the amendment to the amendment, please.
Mr. Guerin sends up an amendment to the amendment. The amendment to the amendment is not acceptable to the author. The question occurs on the adoption to the amendment. Show Mr. Guerin voting aye, Mr. Schaefer voting nay. The clerk will ring the bell. So Ms. Kemple voting aye. Mr. Leach voting aye. So Ms. Johnson of Dallas voting aye. Ms. Shaheen voting nay. Have all members voted? There have been 104 ayes and 35 nays. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. The chair recognizes Mr. Schaefer to close on the amendment as amended.
The amendment is withdrawn.
You cannot withdraw an amendment.
Mr. Schaefer sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection to the adoption of the amendment? This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. So Mr. Leach voting aye. Mr. Guerin voting aye. So Mr. Canales voting aye. Mr. Kemple voting aye. So Mr. Spiller voting aye. Have all members voted? There being 124 ayes and 19 nays, the amendment is adopted. Does any member wish to speak for, on, or against the resolution? The chair recognizes Mr. Martinez Fisher in opposition to the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise to oppose this, and when I have the opportunity, I intend to ask Chairman Guerin some questions from the back mic, but the speeches come first. This is a process. This is a 2/3 House Joint Resolution, 100 votes, and process matters. And so when I look at the bill, there are some concerns that I have that ought to be concerns for this body. I don't see any provisions about how these casinos will be constructed with union jobs. I don't see provisions that say these hotels and casinos will be operated by union workers. I don't see provisions that talk about women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, small business enterprises. What we all know is SWIMBY and procurement that we see at all levels of government. You see commitments to SWIMBY. You see commitments to bring people that don't have these opportunities. And what I worry is that if we don't have it in here now, we won't be able to have it because you only have to look at page 7, line 4. Page 7, line 4 says that to be a qualified applicant to run these casinos, you have to have adequate experience and casino gaming operations. I can only think of one person in this state that can actually say they have casino gaming operations experience. 30 million Texans, 254 counties, and only one person by my book has the gaming experience to be a qualified applicant. And we're going to put this in our Texas Constitution for Texans to tell you you have no place here. You will never be able to climb the ladder to run and manage a casino because you don't have the experience. As a minority, I know a little bit about that. And so I know some of you do too. And if that's not compelling enough, I want you to go to page 12, line 14. And this is the provision that I've been telling folks is the provision that the House always wins. I don't mean the Texas House. I mean the casino house. So it says on page 12 at line 14, there is a 15% tax on the gross casino gaming revenue, and we're going to create that by general law. We'll create the tax component by general law, but that 15% is in the Constitution. So if we ever want to change that 15% to 16% or 17% or 18%, as they do well, we do well, HJR. We have to come back now and get a 2/3 hard 100 vote so that we can be a better business partner. Now, bear in mind, we just dedicated these revenues to our teachers. We want to dedicate these revenues to education. And if we think we need a little bit more help, we can't do it with general law. And so when the House always wins, it tells me, look, I'm not a no, I'm a not now. There are a number of things not right with this. There are a number of things that don't pencil for me. And we know that should this even pass and make it across the hall, it may not go very far over there either. So I say, well, you know what? Let's spend some time and get it right. Let's make sure that we're not going to send a false message to Texans that they will never be able to be in this position. I will tell you anecdotally, when a Fortune 100 company in Toyota Manufacturing North America came to San Antonio to build trucks, there's not a single Latino in town that said, I know how to do that. And if you look at every major supplier to that truck production factory, they're all minority owned. 51% minority owned. Toyota's their partner. Toyota put the capital in. Toyota taught them how to be auto manufacturers. And that's the Texas story. That's what we want to see. You don't see that here. You don't see that in this provision. And so I have a hard time accepting that. I'd much rather want to work on something to make it better. And I'm not just nibbling around the edges. I'm trying to find how we can make substantive changes. And so here's my concern. If we just vote for this and send it over, we say we are okay with the policy, and we can disguise that in the general talking point of let the voters decide. I believe that the voters should decide, but the voters don't get to build the policy. The voters don't get to say that we believe in minority and women and small business ownership. They should have a role in this. Voters don't get to decide whether we have labor that are working and operating these casinos. Something wrong with that. And so when I vote no, I vote to say, let's spend some time and get it right and come back and we can have a better conversation. And so with that, I rise and ask you to vote no on the HJR. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Frank in opposition to the bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Members, agree with Representative Martinez-Fisher. Didn't think I'd say that from the front mic. Thank you very much. A little levity. That was funny. No, I just want to point out something. We literally, in this bill, are going to set aside money to pay for the human problems that are going to be caused by this. literally set aside money in here to make sure we take care of the addiction problems. Don't think we have any money set aside for some of the human trafficking issues, but we're literally setting aside money because we know the problems it's going to take. I just think that's ironic. I ask you to vote no for the bill.
The chair recognizes Mr. Shaheen in opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, there is bipartisan opposition to casinos, and here's why. The average age of a sex trafficking victim in the state of Texas is a 12 to 14-year-old little girl. And if we have multiple casinos in our state, sex trafficking of those 12 to 14-year-old little girls is going to go vertical. I've talked to the Texas Council on Domestic Violence. I've talked to the UTMB. And the people that lose out the most, not just the sex trafficking victims, but the women. I promise you, domestic violence will go vertical. I've seen the studies. A woman that is married to a problem gambler is 10 times more likely to go to the ER. Other states that have legalized gambling have witnessed and lived those statistics. It is a fact. This bill is not going anywhere. The Senate has not even given this a hearing. This is dead. So all I'm asking you is in a bipartisan fashion, we vote this down. Just think of we've been talking about budget impact. All we've been talking about is the revenue impact, not at this time.
Will the gentleman yield?
Not at this time. All we've been talking about is the revenue impact. Let's talk about the cost impact. Let's talk about human services. Let's talk about the increase in CPS. How many little children, when literally tens of thousands of mostly males blow a month's paycheck, go home, beat their wives in front of their children, and yes, I'm going to be transparent like that with you right now, because that will happen. Tens of thousands throughout the state of Texas. Little children will see that. And so our budget gets impact with CPS, with Medicaid, with homelessness. This is a bad deal. Texas is better than this. We don't need this.
Ms. Johnson of Dallas, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Gentleman yields questions.
Mr. Shaheen, I applaud your concern for domestic violence, but I'm concerned that you consistently oppose a lot of measures in this building that would protect women of domestic violence.
That's not true.
For example,
that's not true.
No, it's true. For
First
example,
of all,
The gentlelady will confine her remarks to the,
I just
to the
find
bill
it
in front of us.
interesting that only now
what your
at this
statement
point.
was inaccurate to the body. I've supported
That's not
significant investment. I support the local.
Both members will confine the remarks to the bill, the resolution before the House.
So
I personally support the sex trafficking victims organization in my district. My wife and I volunteer for them. So I really don't appreciate you misleading the body about my work with sex trafficking. I do it as a volunteer.
sex trafficking and domestic violence are two different issues. Wouldn't you agree?
The members will confine their remarks to the resolution before
I'm done,
the
Mr.
House.
Speaker.
No, I bet you are.
The chair recognizes Mr. Morales of Maverick in opposition to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this bill would allow 8 full-scale casinos in various parts of the state to be set up. The bill would benefit many others in the state as well as out-of-state interests as currently drafted. It would devastate my constituency, the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas, and its members. It is the only federally recognized tribe in the state of Texas. Therefore, when I brought up the amendment, because of the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas and their attorneys, they mentioned that it was a mandatory requirement that we include what's called the IGRA language, Indian Gaming Reservation Act language. That is the reason why the amendment failed, based on the speaker and their staff. They said that my amendment included language that would circumvent the governor actually negotiating a pact with these folks that were going to be working a permit. Now, I feel that the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas is caught in a catch-22. Because they're federally recognized, they need to include this language, but at the same time, because we include the language in the amendment, we're left out and we're unable to move forward because of its germaneness. If there is one segment of this society that we must need to take care of, that historically, not only in the state of Texas, but in all of the United States, we have collectively undermined and mistreated for decades, it has been the indigenous. And it is the reason why we needed to make sure that they were protected in this bill. We're taking care of special interests that are coming from outside the state, and we cannot even take care of our own constituents, the most vulnerable segment of our society that need this special care. 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, I'm marking myself now, at a young age, crossing with my parents to Piedras Negras, from Eagle Pass to Piedras Negras, I couldn't quite understand as a young child why a segment of our society, of our community, was okay with living under the International Bridge with cardboard huts with 50, 75 members and one water faucet. To go from those 30, 40 years to where we find the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas and what they have done in that time since they were federally recognized, it is eye-opening. It is a dream that was never imaginable for them or for many of us in Eagle Pass. This bill would undermine all that. This bill would kill all of the dreams of our community, the economic advantages that we have benefited from, the fact that we have been able to uplift this segment of society that depends on us to be the voice for them. It is not right. If we cannot take care of our own, why are we putting out-of-state interest, these big corporations with billions of dollars, why are we cutting the line for them and putting them ahead of the line when we should be thinking of our own first and the most vulnerable segment of the society? For that reason, I am asking you to consider, please, vote no on this bill. It would decimate the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas, all that they have done for the last 30, 40 years to get where they are, to be an important segment of society, to be the number 2 employer in the community, the number 1 private employer in the community. They have done so much for the community. And Representative Shaheen is correct. This is not all just good things that have happened to the community. We have seen the other side. Each one of you is going to have to go to your community and have to answer your constituents. There will be money because you can actually ask me, money that will have to be spent, funds that will have to be spent to address the issues that come from this. We are at the front of this. We have faced this, but at the same time, I was happy to advocate for the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas and for our constituency because at the end of the day, the positives, in my view, outweigh the negatives. That is a decision that every one of you will have to make when you vote on this bill, and you have to talk back and you have to respond to your constituents on this issue. Please, if you truly care about a segment of society that we have left out for decades and decades and decades, please vote no, because it is the only economic stimulus that has benefited the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas and Maverick County and the region. And for that reason alone, I am asking you to please consider them as you make this important vote and vote no on this bill.
Ms. Gonzalez, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, does the gentleman yield?
The gentleman yield for questions.
I yield for questions.
Gentleman yields.
And Representative Morales, I'm not trying to begrudge you fighting for your district. We were fighting for our districts earlier today, so that's your job. I do want to course correct one major fact that you said that I think is important. You said that there's only one federally recognized tribe, and that's not accurate. I'm very proudly represent the Estado del Sur Pueblo. That is also a federally recognized tribe. The Alabama Coshada, they're also a federally recognized tribe. So I just think it's really important for us to not just make those nations invisible as well. And so I just want to course correct for the record.
And I'd like to clear up that are federally recognized and that have to go through IGRA, the Indian Gaming Reservation Act.
And I think, yes. So but I think it's really important for us to have recognize that there are differences, and I just don't want to make our communities invisible as well. And I just want to say
and they're
that.
not. I was
No, and I'm not
happily
trying to be-
supportive of
Yeah.
the amendment for the Coshadas and the Tiguas because I believe that they're in the same boat and they deserve the attention. And they are that segment of society also that we have left out, the most vulnerable in Texas, and that we need to, they should be coming first before anyone from these out of state or from these billion-dollar companies.
Right, and I'm not trying to begrudge you. I just don't want to misinform and want to correct,
Point well taken,
correct
Ms.
the record.
Gonzalez. Thank you.
Mr. Martinez Fisher for
Gentleman yield for question.
Gentleman yield for questions.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Morales, when I was talking about there's some inherent problems in this legislation that needs some time to get fixed, is this one of the real examples?
This is a true example. The Kickapoo tribe of Texas and their folks have had and have wanted a seat at the table to make sure that they address these issues from day one. And I don't believe, at the very least, this is my second session, the first time that I've actually had some actual ability to communicate with my other representatives that are carrying this legislation. I do want to say, and I respect Chairman Leach and also Chairman Kemple for giving me the opportunity this week to lay out what I thought were the needs of the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas. But I think more work is, this is not, my predecessor had to deal with it and his predecessor had to deal with it. So obviously it is something that is still ongoing and requires a lot more attention by this governing body.
And if you feel like this measure doesn't have the level of success that's needed to pass, it sort of gives you the opportunity to be at the table because there's a recognition that more must be done to get the support of this body. Is that what you're trying to do?
Yes, sir. Very much so. And in fact, not only must the Coshadas, the Tiguas, and the Kickapoo should be recognized, but they should not be marginalized and be given a seat at the end of the table. They should be at the forefront of the table. We should be considering them and their interest first and foremost before anybody else because they are our constituency. They have been here, and we all understand and need to recognize that they have been a vulnerable segment of our society through our doing, and that we need to correct those issues.
And not to pop quiz you on this, but with regard to the Native American tribe in your community, how long have they been here in Texas?
Jeez, hundreds of years.
Before there was a Texas?
Before there was a Texas. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas and their members, these are proud people. These are resilient people. These are hardworking people. They're supportive of the community, and not only that, under the IGRA agreement that they have with the federal government, all of the revenue that's generated must go to the general welfare of their members. And it is for that reason that I respectfully ask that each of you please vote no on this bill. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Hayes in opposition to the bill.
Members, I rise to speak against this bill for two reasons. One, I don't believe this is a core function of government. Two, what could be the other reason to be against it? We're going to create another governmental bureaucracy to run this gaming operation. Now, as a Republican, we came here to reduce the size of government, not to increase the size of it. The numbers I've seen, the tens of millions of dollars it will take to run this enterprise will greatly expand the size of government. So I ask you to consider, is this a core function of government? Why don't we focus on those? How many debates have we seen here during this session on everything under the sun. Let's focus on the core functions of government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Canales, for what purpose?
The gentleman yield for a couple questions.
Mr. Hayes, will you yield for a question? The gentleman yields.
Thank you. Earlier in session, we voted for the court bill where we created 13 new courts. Did you vote for that?
I did.
So that was just another big expansion of government, like you said we shouldn't do.
Members, let's confine our remarks to the resolution before the House.
May I respond to that, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Hayes. The chair recognizes Mr. Guerin to close on the bill. The chair recognizes Ms. Davis in favor of the resolution.
Mr. Speaker, members, I would just say that this is an opportunity for Texas to give its citizens a chance to vote on something that we are hearing from our constituents about. We continue to hear about the money and the revenues going to our border states in Oklahoma and Louisiana. This is an opportunity for us to allow our citizens to vote. The other thing I'd like to tell you about is it's not a perfect probably at this point. But as we do legislation every day, we continue to perfect it, make sure that we are accountable to all the constituents in the state of Texas. And I would just ask us not to get hung up on whether or not this is something we would allow our citizens to vote for. That's all this is doing, is allowing us to have that opportunity so that they can make a determination as citizens, and we'll all respect what the outcome will be. With that, I'd ask you to vote for this HCR and give the citizens an opportunity to create this economic catalyst in our state rather than taking that outside of our state.
The chair recognizes Mr. Guerin to close on the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members, thank you for this, listening to all of this. First, I'd like to address the Kickapoos. They were offered an opportunity.
Mr. Harless, for what purpose?
Well, the gentleman yielded for a few
As
questions.
soon as I finish this statement,
Yes, sir.
then I'll be happy to.
Just a minute,
They
Mr.
were offered an opportunity today to join with the other two Indian tribes in the compact. They turned it down. After their amendment went down, Mr. Kemple offered that to them, and they turned it down. And I'll yield to you, Mr. Harless, and then I've got to come back and finish this.
Mr. Harless, for what purpose?
Thank you. Will the gentleman yield for
The
some
gentleman yield for
questions?
questions.
I will.
He yields.
Chairman Guerin, all we're doing today is voting on whether or not to take this to our constituents and let them have the freedom to make the decision on whether or not we have gambling in Texas. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Harless.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Dutton, for what purpose?
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Would the gentleman yield for questions?
I'll be happy to, Mr. Dutton.
Thank you. Mr. Guerin, how long has this House been debating this issue of gambling?
To my knowledge, Mr. Dutton, 23 years, that's as long as I've been here.
Well, I think it started before you got here, but we've been debating it at least 25 years. And do you think that means that we ought to at least give this to the voters of Texas to let them decide?
The purpose of this constitutional amendment is to let our voters decide. Let the voters in House District 99 decide. Let the voters in House District 130, House District 1, let them decide. There will be no casino in anybody's district if that district or in any county that votes this down. There will not be a casino there.
Right. So nobody has to fear having a casino that their constituents don't want.
That's correct.
And do you understand why somebody would be opposed to letting the people decide?
Well, every 2 years we let the people decide, and a lot of us are fortunate enough to get to come back. Others get beat, and so I trust the voters in the district, and they get to vote on us every 2 years. I trust them to vote on this. Let them decide if they want it or not.
That may be the reason some of these people don't want the voters to decide.
I don't have an opinion on that, Mr. Dutton, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd also like to say, the constitutional amendment is not a place where you don't put in the concept. Yes, Mr. Dutton.
I just had one final question.
Yes, sir.
And that was about where the money goes.
The money in this, part of it's going to go to law enforcement to address the problems that Mr. Shaheen brought up that don't necessarily, the statistics don't show that that it's any different than it is anywhere else. Part of it goes to horse racing, and part of it goes to the administration of the new gaming commission, which Mr. Hayes is opposed to, but it will be self-supporting from the money coming in, and the rest of it is going to teacher pay raises and for the retired teachers for their pension. And that's where the rest of the money's going to.
And I think the bill says 80% of the money
80%,
would
that
go
is
to
correct.
teachers and teacher retirement.
Yes, sir, that is correct.
I thank you for this bill, and I know that the 30 million Texans are wanting to at least decide this measure, and we should be equally deciding to give it to the Texans to vote on it. So thank you for the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. And I want to say that the constitutional amendment is not the place to decide whether it's union workers, non-union workers, who the contractor is, and who the contractor is not. That's to be decided later. Members, I appreciate your time on this. Let's let our voters decide. Thank you. I'll close.
The question occurs on the adoption of the resolution HR 155. This is a record vote required by the Constitution. The clerk will ring the bell. Mr. Guerin voting aye, Mr. Kemple voting aye, Mr. Cortez voting aye, Mr. Romero voting aye. Have all members voted? There being 92 ayes, 51 nays, HJR 1.155 is passed through engrossment.